This is a photograph of historic Route 66 in Arizona. In the daylight, it's a vast, completely flat stretch of desert. But at night, this environment transforms into one of the most isolating drives in America. For 32-year-old Michael Carter, that isolation was a standard part of the job. He was a veteran long-haul trucker who had driven this exact stretch dozens of times. He knew every curve, every abandoned building, and every gas station along the route. On one routine overnight delivery in the fall of 2018, the environmental conditions were exceptionally bleak. There was no moonlight, and thick clouds blanketed the desert. The only illumination came from his headlights cutting through total darkness. When drivers spend hours staring at endless pavement under these conditions, they often experience highway hypnosis. This is a psychological state where the brain, starved for stimulation, begins to misinterpret shadows and play tricks on the eyes. Michael's baseline was high. He wasn't a novice prone to early morning jitters, and he was intimately familiar with how his mind and body reacted to the monotony of a long-haul shift. The break in his routine occurred at exactly 2:17 a.m. Ahead of him, standing completely motionless on the shoulder of the highway, was a figure. As his truck approached, the high beams revealed a pale woman wearing a long white dress. She made no attempt to flag him down. She displayed no reaction to the massive vehicle bearing down on her. With long, dark hair hanging over her shoulders, she simply stood there, staring dead ahead at the asphalt. Looking at this dark, featureless expanse, you can see the terrain is entirely flat. There are no trees, no ditches, and nowhere to hide. Yet, as Michael's truck rolled past and he checked his side mirror, the woman was completely gone. At 2:17 a.m., on a stretch of road with no physical cover, a person had simply ceased to exist in the space of a few seconds. Michael kept driving, letting the radio distract him for another 20 minutes until he reached a brightly lit all-night gas station. He parked his rig and went inside to grab coffee. The elderly cashier working the register immediately noticed how shaken the driver looked. When Michael described the motionless woman, the cashier simply stopped, looked at him, and asked, "White dress? Long black hair?" The old man detailed a piece of historical folklore. According to locals, a young woman had died in a fatal car crash near that specific mile marker during the 1970s. Michael tried to dismiss the story as a classic urban legend, but the cashier insisted this was an ongoing issue. Truckers had been coming into his station reporting identical sightings of the exact same woman for decades. In remote, unmonitored geographic regions, local folklore often tracks recurring patterns that official channels ignore. By 3:40 a.m., Michael was back behind the wheel and deep into a stretch of the desert where the isolation is absolute. Without warning, the silence of his cab was broken. A violent burst of static exploded from the truck's radio, drowning out the engine noise with heavy interference. Michael reached down to adjust the volume, assuming a lost signal. Then, cutting straight through the static, a soft, barely audible woman's voice whispered 2 words, "Help me." The transmission vanished in seconds, but 10 minutes later, his headlights caught something in the distance. The same pale woman was standing dead center in his driving lane. Michael slammed the brakes. The massive truck locked up, screeching across the pavement. He braced for a collision, but in a fraction of a second, the figure disappeared. The road ahead was entirely empty. This event had moved beyond Michael's own eyes, breaching the truck's radio and forcing a physical, violent reaction from 10 tons of steel. Shaking uncontrollably, Michael pulled to the shoulder and called the highway patrol. Officers arrived shortly after and conducted a search of the surrounding area. They found nothing. The dirt yielded no footprints. The road showed no fresh tire marks from another car. There was no stranded vehicle anywhere in sight. Officially, the patrolman suggested Michael was just exhausted. Off the record, one of the responding officers pulled him aside and admitted that these exact encounters are quietly, but frequently, reported by professional drivers. Michael eventually left his career in long-haul trucking, changing jobs to ensure he would never have to drive an isolated route again. While official incident reports attributed the event to exhaustion, the experience resulted in a veteran driver walking away from a successful career. 5 years later, in 2023, Michael was cleaning out old files when he discovered his truck's automated dashcam backups from that night. Charting the archive, he isolated a digital video file labeled exactly 2:17 a.m. A frame-by-frame analysis of the blurry footage captured a pale figure by the road. As the truck's headlights swept past, they reflected